to today's spiritual talk. So today is a beautiful day. It's a holy day. It's Sunday. And I really wanted to bring on the subject of what is consciousness. Because consciousness is what drives our motives, what drives our ambitions, and what drives our purpose here on earth. And having an awakened consciousness can make a whole world of difference in how your life turns out and what you're really working towards. Are you really working towards an asleep consciousness, which is really driven by an ego? Or are you being driven by this awakened consciousness of the divine and the whole picture of it? And that's what consciousness is, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Consciousness awakens us to our true life purpose. And this is actually a huge topic that we talked about in my spiritual book club. So if you're not a member yet on my spiritual book club, I really recommend it, because we read this book by Eckhart Tolle called A New Earth, and it's awakening to your true life's purpose. And as we finished the last chapter, it was all about this new earth. But this new earth can only be achieved when you're connected to the divine consciousness, when you're connected to the bigger picture. And I'm actually gonna read a phrase here that I think is really, really interesting. The awakened doing is the outer aspect of the next stage in the evolution of consciousness on our planet. You see, because the closer that we get to the end of our present evolutionary stage, the more dysfunctional the ego becomes. In the same way that a caterpillar becomes dysfunctional just before it transforms into a butterfly, but the new consciousness is arising even as the old dissolves. So the evolution of the human consciousness is activated when you spiritually awaken on your journey. Otherwise, it's going to remain dormant and asleep. And consciousness is basically remembering who we really are at the core. We already innately have all of this information, and it's just awakening to it. And that's why the spiritual awakening gets that name, right? Spiritual awakening. You're literally waking up from a slumber. And this consciousness that we're all connected to is collective. It's a collective consciousness because remember, we are all one with the universe. So of course we're all connected to it. Of course we can all feel these energies. And of course we can empathize with others because of it. Because our consciousness is awakened. And our consciousness is also where we get a lot of divine knowledge and connect to the higher beings, connect to universal memories, the Akashic memories. And that's why I really felt called to talk about that today in my Akashic library, you want to say, just kidding, my ancient library, because this is what is the metaphor of our brain and the energy that we're all a part of. Okay, there's a metaphor, for example, that when a caterpillar, being in its caterpillar mode, becomes dysfunctional, is because it's ready to evolutionize as a butterfly. So that's exactly what happens to our ego. When our ego becomes dysfunctional to our reality, that's when the evolution of your consciousness is just about to begin. Because when your consciousness is on point and aligned with spirit, that's when you're able to align with your mission, your true calling, why you were here on earth, and you start to remember all of the pieces. Okay, and there's another phrase here that I think was really, really interesting about consciousness. Awakening is a shift in consciousness in which thinking and awareness separate, because awareness is aware of the consciousness, whereas thinking is your own mind chatter, your own ego. Okay, and for many people, they don't even realize this is happening. A lot of people's awakenings come up spontaneously or because of a traumatic event. But regardless, this consciousness that we're all connected to is our connection with universal intelligence. In other words, presence is consciousness without thought. Consciousness is activated by being in the present moment, which is what the other book taught us, the power of the now. And that's what meditation is, right? It's connecting to our consciousness. Because if you're all, busy all day and in your head all day, anxious, angry, those are all emotions from the ego. When you drop those and you're finally able to silence your mind, you allow for this genius of the divine, which is this consciousness. Okay? And when you're awakened to your consciousness, you're awakened to your outer purpose because your inner purpose is awakened. So your inner purpose is aligned with divine, must align with your outer consciousness. Okay? And your motivating factor, the reason why you do things, is because of your consciousness. This consciousness drives us all light workers, because this consciousness is all driven by the divine, right? He controls the consciousness because he is the consciousness. Okay? Now I know it seems a little difficult to comprehend, but it's a very abstract concept that needs to be talked about. I think talking about concept, I just saw the word concept. So instead of awakening, you add the concept of awakening to your mind, or the mental image of what an awakened or enlightened person is like, and then you try to live up to that image. Living up to an image that you have of yourself or that of other people have of you is inauthentic living, another unconscious role that the ego plays. So what is a relationship between awareness and thinking? Awareness is the space in which thoughts exist when that space has become conscious of itself. So basically, this space where our thoughts are is in our mind, right? So when you allow yourself to just be aware of the space and not in the space, meaning stop thinking, that's where the consciousness comes in, because that's kind of like the home of the consciousness. Okay, I'm trying to simplify this. And look, even Einstein talks about this. I want to know the mind of God. The rest are details. And what is this mind of God? Consciousness. What does it mean to know the mind of God? To be aware. What are the details? Your outer purpose and whatever happens outwardly is the detail. But the main course is the inner purpose, the consciousness itself. Okay. And without living in alignment with your primary purpose, which is consciousness, whatever purpose you come up with, whatever goals in your life, even if it's to create heaven on earth, they're going to be of the ego, and so will become destroyed by time, by divine intervention. And human intelligence is different than universal intelligence, because universal intelligence doesn't come from us. It comes from a higher being. Human intelligence is when we try to push our human intelligence above all, above the divine, that becomes egoic, right? That becomes against the consciousness. Because look, as the new consciousness is beginning to emerge on the planet, an increasing number of people no longer need to be shaken to have an awakening. They embrace the awakening process voluntarily, even while still engaged in the outward cycle of growth and expansion. And when that cycle is no longer usurped by the ego, when you finally let it go, then is when the spiritual dimension will come into this world through the outward movement, which is thought, speech, action, creation, as powerfully as through the return movement, which is stillness, being, and the dissolution of form. So until now, human intelligence, which is no more than a minute aspect of universal intelligence, has been distorted and misused by the ego. And this is basically intelligence in the service of madness. So splitting the atom requires great intelligence. Using that intelligence for building and stockpiling atomic bombs is insane, or at best extremely unintelligent, right? Stupidity is relatively harmless, but intelligent stupidity is highly dangerous. This intelligent stupidity is threatening our survival as a species. And this is where this conversation comes into play. This is about the collective human consciousness, because before we continue, let me briefly teach you something that I learned, that we came across enlightened in my Lightwork University this week, which was class 3. What is this experiment on earth, right, by these higher beings? If you aren't already really connected to cosmic consciousness, which that's what my show is about, and it's exclusive for members only on my Spiritual Counseling TV network as part of the School of Light, this cosmic consciousness is accepting that we are part of this experiment on earth in trying to embody higher frequencies in our flesh. Okay, so staying with me right now. As a collective human species, the more that we can connect to this divine consciousness in our flesh in this moment and become of lighter beings, which requires being awakened on your journey, then the more progressive this experiment will be, and we will thrive as a species, as a planet. All right, so that's a brief of what we learned. If you want to learn more about that, obviously purchase the program or even check out my Cosmic Consciousness show. So again, look at this. What is consciousness? This is the whole subject of what's consciousness. Consciousness is already conscious because it's just about remembering, right? It's not about learning something new. We already innately are it, okay? Yet it is the unmanifested because it is the eternal. The universe, however, is only gradually becoming conscious, you see? This is the experiment. Consciousness itself is timeless and therefore does not evolve. It was never born and does not die. Because something that's infinite, how can it die if it's infinite, right? So this is about this infinite potential because we are awakened to this consciousness. We are part of this consciousness. And when consciousness becomes the manifested universe, which is bridging the here into the physical reality, it appears to be subject to time and to undergo an evolutionary process. But no human mind is capable of comprehending fully the reason for this process, for what I just explained, right? Our species, our DNA, unless you're highly enlightened already on your journey, which is very few on this planet, you're not going to get the entire picture, basically. You're going to be missing pieces of the puzzle. And that's the experiment. That's kind of like the test. If humans are able to get to this level and embody unconditional love and compassion, despite the corruption around Earth, because the corruption, the more and more corruption there's on Earth, the more human species is failing at this experiment. Okay, and obviously I talk about the root of that theory on my Cosmic Consciousness show and the Lightwork University, but it was a deep revelation as to what really is going on and why things happen around the world as it is, right? So it was shocking for me, but it's about accepting this truth, okay? Accepting that you light workers here are here for a mission, to fulfill that mission, because you're working for something greater. It's not just about yourself, and this is where we let the ego go, and this is where we come genuinely connected to this divine consciousness, Christ consciousness. And I talk a lot about this on my book as well. Christ consciousness, we connect to this when we get to the heart chakra. So that chakra ascension guide will be out soon, so I'll let you guys know. But we can glimpse it within ourselves. And this is through the heart chakra, where we embody this unconditional love and compassion for all of humanity, and hence become a conscious participant in it. By being on your mission, by being that way shower and that beacon of light and hope, this is how you partake in this conscious awareness and mission. So consciousness is the intelligence, which is of the divine, the organizing principle behind the arising of form. So how perfect is this worded, right? Because the divine orchestrated everything the way it should be, the way he wanted it to be initially. And we are currently at this place through divine order, right? Orchestration, organization. So consciousness has been preparing forms for millions of years so that it can express itself through them in the manifested. That's the goal, right? To manifest itself. So although the unmanifested realm of pure consciousness could be considered another dimension, it is not separate from this dimension of form. Form and formlessness interpenetrate. They are part of one. It's like saying the opposite poles, the north and the south, are really one. It's like masculine and feminine are really one soul. Polarities, opposite polarities, are really driven from the same source. Okay, and this is where Hermetic principles comes in, right? The duality principle, the heroes gamos, as above so below, as within so without. You see? So what we manifest within will manifest without. So if we align our consciousness from within, we will behave externally through our consciousness, you see. And this is how we become more enlightened as spiritual workers here on earth. So I know I sound repetitive, but that's the core of the issue, and I'm repeating it because I want you to remember that that's your purpose, that's your mission, that's what you stand for, and that's what you strive for. Okay, so the unmanifested flows into this dimension as awareness, which is this empty space, this inner empty space, where is this presence of just being. That is consciousness. Because if you're just doing, and not stopping just to be, not even think, then you're not really connecting to this consciousness. So how does it do that? Through the human form that becomes conscious and thus fulfills its destiny. You see, that's the destiny of us human species, is to actually manifest this consciousness into reality. All of us walking as light beings on this earth will create this new earth, you see. So the human form was created for this higher purpose. Of course, that is the experiment. So he, obviously Eckhart Tolle was very aware of this as well. And millions of other forms prepared the ground for it. This has been happening for a gazillion years. And that's something that we revealed in the Lightwork University Class 3. So if you purchase that program, go back to Class 3, towards the second half of the class. Consciousness incarnates into the manifested dimension. That is to say, it becomes form. We are form. We are flesh. So when it does so, it enters a dreamlike state. Because innately, this higher divine intelligence is energy. You see, these higher beings, I believe, are just energy. They're so light, frequency, that they can't withstand being in a flesh body. And that's why this is the experiment of human species. To be able to stay in this manifested form while still being of light. Okay, because innately human beings will always have that inner darkness, right? Because of, perfect example, it could be, you could call it a myth, a legend, but in the Bible, the story of Adam and Eve, that's exactly where we're at, right? One of them was tainted by the apple, by temptation of the snake, and it corrupted the rest of generations. So how do they awaken to this consciousness having that happened? And that is the challenge. That is the test. It's kind of like how love is tested. That's how humankind is being tested. To reach this consciousness in your flesh. Okay. So intelligence remains, but consciousness becomes unconscious of itself. You see? So I know it sounds paradoxical, and contradictical, but true consciousness is really unconscious. It's natural. It's going with the flow. It's just being. So it loses itself in form, becomes identified with form. So that's what happens when a human incarnates into flesh. They lose touch with the consciousness. You see, because they get so lost in the form, in the physical world, the ego. And the ego, remember, in psychology, Carl Jung called it the facade, the ego mask, the persona that we portray out into the world, but it has nothing to do with the true self within, which is our higher self. That can only be accessed through consciousness, awareness, intention as well. So even psychologists bring this up because psychology is a science, and psychology is actually one of the hermetic professions. Hermeticism are practiced by astrologers, psychologists, and doctors. So I'm in one of those major careers. So that's why I was awakened to all this, because it really is all together. Psychology dives deep into the psyche, and the truth of the psyche is this consciousness, basically, is that we're all light beings, and there's a greater world out there which is spiritual, and it's unseen, and that's what we need to awaken to. The unseen, make it seen and manifest it, so that we can begin to actually live it in the physical and not just in our dreams. Okay, because during dream state, we're always traveling astrally towards these places. You know, every time I have these very vivid dreams, it's like literally I'm in another realm, and I am in another realm, right? Obviously it's a dream, you can say, but people labeled it a dream because they don't know that this can also be accessed by people consciously awake. Okay, and that's when you start having control over these spiritual gifts of yours as you rise in your higher consciousness, which your higher chakras, awakening to the higher consciousness, which is what I talk about in my book. So make sure that you stay on the lookout for that book. Subscribe to my newsletter so that you can get the update as to when my new book is going to be launched and published. And it will be within this year, definitely. But the first, I have it because I did a first edition. I even called it Heal from the Inside Out. But I was guided to unpublish it and kind of just upgrade the book. And it's symbolic because I've also been going through a lot of ascension upgrades, and all of us as a collective, light workers especially, have been experiencing these light code activation and DNA upgrades. Okay, and perfect that, you know, what's happening in the world is really a time of going within and reflecting, not being so much on the exterior world, not even, you know, being around people so much, because that's not even what we're allowed to do. But it's a time of going within, because this is how we awaken to this consciousness, by going within in solitude. Okay, so I feel like it's a little bit like a hermit mode energy, but that's how you reach the state of stillness, of presence, and of true divine connection to source. Okay, so glimpses of awakening come only at the moment of the dissolution of an individual form, that is to say, death of the ego, metaphysically. And then begins the next incarnation, the next identification with form, the next individual dream that is part of the collective dream. You see, all you light workers out there who have a dream that you've never been able to let go of, it's because it's connected to this collective dream. Okay, and you know, this even came out in Lightworker class, right? In the Lightworker University class 3, that these dreams were given to you for a purpose, because it is part of this collective mission. Okay, so keep focused on that and keep doing your work, basically. Keep being in line with the consciousness. On our planet, the human ego represents the final stage of universal sleep. This is when you're completely asleep and slumber on your spiritual journey. The identification of consciousness with form. It was a necessary stage in the evolution of consciousness, because the human brain is highly differentiated form through which consciousness enters this dimension. It even contains approximately 100 billion nerve cells, which are called neurons in your brain, about the same number as they are stars in our galaxy, which could be seen as a macrocosmic brain. And we don't use all our potential of our brain. You see why I'm saying this? Because dolphins, for example, are mammals that use up to 90% of their brain. And they're able to do all of these spiritual things like telepathy, communicate from one side of the world to another just with their minds. And that's opening up to this consciousness, because they are, you know, these divine higher dimensional beings. And I talk more about that. I don't want to go too much into detail, because that's kind of like the revelations, right? That you want to check out as part of your membership. So the brain does not create consciousness, but consciousness created the brain. Because the brain is physical. The brain is a form, is manifested form here on earth. It's not the ethereal. It's not the actual divine intelligence, the energy. The atom, which we're all born of, right? Even Earth. Everything, the galaxy is created to just one little atom. And even this atom was created out of nothing first. So that's where I get a little more intricate in my psychology study on my School of Light. So go ahead and look at that one. The first episode, we basically just talked about quantum physics and Einstein, and he was very in touch with all of this. And that's how they invented, you know, quantum healing sessions. That's where we travel to. So when the brain gets damaged, it does not mean that you lose consciousness. Rather, it means that consciousness can no longer use that form to enter this dimension. You see, it's so funny how exact, and it was information from just my mind, right? But when the brain gets damaged, when it starts to get too dysfunctional for you anymore, when it starts to get too heavy, too burdensome. It's like, for example, like when a relationship starts to become too toxic, it becomes already dysfunctional that you can't survive in it anymore. This is what happens when you awaken on your journey. Your brain, your ego, your thoughts become too much because you're losing touch with the true consciousness. So this consciousness cannot enter this form of your dimension, which is the 3D physical dimension, only when you're connected to the higher dimension, the 5D world. And this is the split of the earth that we're all experiencing right now. Okay, we are experiencing this because, you know, even Dolores Cannon says this, that 2020 was going to be a year of this earth split, metaphysically. The 3D reality, the people who stay stuck in this 3D world, who are basically going to suffer and find it very miserable living here on earth, because not only is there going to be a void missing, but they're going to be experiencing all these tower moments and not know how to handle these curveballs. Whereas the one who is ascending to the 5D world, they see things for what it really is, an illusion. So they're rising above it with faith, with hope, with love. And they're going to come out the other side, which outside this other portal, on the other side of this other portal, is this beautiful, enchanted world. And this is where the spiritual comes in, and they connect to this higher consciousness. That's why they're able to access this gateway and portal opening. Okay? So everything that you do here on earth must stem from an awakened doing. Call it that, awakened doing. Not just unconsciously, just like a robot, just going about your day doing this, doing that, because you think you have to do it. But when you ask yourself, why am I really doing this? Why am I working this job? Is it actually even making an influence in the world? And a lot of people, you know, don't care to make an influence in the world. And I see why they can think that way, right? Because this is hard work. It's not easy. You know, it doesn't mean that being a light worker is not work. You actually have to work a lot. And a lot of people don't want to get the responsibility of the whole world on their shoulders, which that's not what the divine is telling you to do. It's just telling you to be of light. So I feel like the people who are not doing awakened are because they're asleep. Okay, they're asleep and there's information missing in their system. And that's why they think this way. Okay, because if you're awakened, no way you're gonna go back. No way you're gonna deny the divine. You see, it's inevitable. You're gonna wanna be of service to the divine. You're gonna wanna devote your life to this mission. But it's all about connecting to your consciousness and the evolution of your soul truly. And that's what the soul journey is all about. Self-mastery, soul growth. Literal growth means evolving. That's why when I talk about psychology, I always say I am for evolutionary psychology. Because I'm not one of those psychologists, for example, that like old school psychologists that would just sit around and listen to your problems all day. That's not getting you anywhere. That's not solution focused. That's a waste of time, of energy, and of spirit. That's a waste of light. You want to make sure that you're offering solutions and you're actually taking action. And this needs to stem from their own individual. They need to awaken to their own purpose so that they can be connected to this consciousness and want to do it for themselves, want to do it for humanity. Okay, not just sit around in lower vibrations in victimhood, because victimhood is the lowest vibration that you can ever live through. When you blame the exterior world for everything that happens to you, and when you see yourself as helpless, That's the lowest of the lowest that you can live by. That's basically living, the worst nightmare ever. So how do you get through that? Is by taking responsibility and ownership of your life and acting through awakened doing, which that is the next stage of evolution of consciousness. And if everybody would be doing this on the planet, our human species would be a different dimension, dynamic, and situation, right? So that's the purpose of today's spiritual talk, is to enlighten you with what really is consciousness and what's the purpose of consciousness and why awaken to your consciousness. What's the good that it's going to bring? The good that it's going to bring is that you're no longer going to live in a circle that's not going anywhere, but you're going to actually have a purpose. You're going to awaken to your true divine purpose. You're going to have a new sense of meaning for life, a new zest for life, passion, vigor, life force, vitality, youthfulness, because the divine is going to bless you with that, and it's going to encourage and support you. Even Tony Robbins says this: the universe works for you, not to you. So everything that happens in your life is not to bring you down. Those curveballs are only to make you grow. So how are you going to handle these curveballs? Awaken to your consciousness so that you can realize the bigger picture, that it's a blessing in disguise. It's a lesson that you need to learn so that you can evolve on your consciousness, on your soul journey, and together make everyone a difference. Together create this new earth, this new evolved human species. So that's how I'm going to end today's spiritual talk. I really hope that you enjoyed all the insights of today. I know that we've been getting shorter on these spiritual talks, but I really feel like it's better to keep it short and to the point. Really make sure, these shows are free on my YouTube channel, that you check out all my other shows on my spiritual book club, on my tantra classes, my mindset talks, which talk about evolutionary psychology, and all the good information and lectures on my School of Light. And that's all part of your membership of my Spiritual Counseling TV network. So make sure you look into it on my website. And I'm wishing you all an amazing and beautiful day. And don't forget to sign up to my free newsletter, as I will be updating you on the launch of my upcoming book. Have an amazing and beautiful day. Namaste.